Hello and welcome to Wild Eric's Traveling Podcast. Today we have Kat from Hawksfire Ceramics, and we're going to be talking about how we met so long ago. I think it was, how long was it, Kat? Was it maybe 30,000 years ago we met?
I think it was during the Cretaceous era.
Yeah, I think there were still
Um,
dinosaurs on the Earth when we met.
yeah, it was before the annoying meteor landed.
I was working at TGI Fridays in Greensboro, North Carolina. I had met a guy named Tim, and I was thrown out of my house at the time because of a dispute with my father. And while I was living with him, I met another roommate of mine. I forgot her name, but we were both having a crisis of the soul. And she says, "Come out with me tonight. We'll drink. We'll go to different friends of mine's houses." And that's where I met Kat. I walked in. There wasn't even many people there, but when I saw Kat, you just have a certain connection with certain people, and I felt like I had known her in another life. That's how deep the connection was. And Kat, would you like to maybe expand on what happened there?
Well, I think one of us was 21. I can't remember which one. Uh, about that age, is that right?
Yeah, I was 21, definitely.
Yeah, and I was there with some friends who I believe they were not really in the mood to be having a late night party. And so they went to bed and left us like in the living room to our own devices. And that's when we started to bond. And
And we
I'm
made
not really,
we made a baby of consciousness. You know, we didn't make a physical baby, but our consciousness formed a new child, a new relationship, which has gone on for 30 years. Um, I've always been fascinated because Kat is very well read, very deep thinker, and I think that's always tied us together. We've always been able to dive deeply into to conversations and talk about everything from love to science fiction to authors and complete madness, you know. So,
yeah, I think that was during my spiritual seeker phase when I was, kind of trying things out. I was reading, Buddhist folklore, I guess, and the Bhagavad Gita and all the other, more standard traditional American stuff like the Celestine Prophecy.
hmm.
And I
I
think
had the
maybe,
Bhagavad, but the other one. Tell me more about that book. The next one, the Celestrin, what was it called?
oh, the Celestine Prophecy, that's not Buddhist. That's more of like a kind of a watered down journey, like a fictional journey of someone who's on a spiritual quest and getting kind of, I don't know, like almost clues from the universe of where to head next.
So did it
However,
influence you?
yes, but I did meet someone from the grad school I eventually went to who told me it was like just a watered down version of like humanistic psychology and transpersonal philosophy. And I wouldn't call it watered down. What I would say is more that it was made accessible for the masses. Um, and so it was, just one of several good entry level kind of books for people who are just kind of wondering what they're up to and what existence is about. It is fictional, though. It's like more of a journey.
Okay, so that's a story of
So,
fiction. I think I
yeah,
found it. Is it a book by James Redfield?
yeah.
I just pulled it up now
A-
on the internet. But
And
go ahead.
you mentioned past lives. There's a book called Many Lives, Many Masters, which was kind of a entry level to some of just the schools of thought that do entertain that as possible. The gentleman who wrote it, I think there are some who consider him debunked, but it's still good if you're just kind of interested in dipping your toe into the field.
Right, but
Um,
you've always been on this quest. I mean, let me ask you a question. Going back before the Celestine prophecy and before the books on Buddhism and all that, What would you say when you were young? Is it that brought you to this kind of a spiritual journey? Was it something that was always in you, or something you grew into as a when you grew later in your teens?
I think this I don't think I've described this to many people, but I think I for a long time I would kind of wake up in the morning and I would be almost like surprised, like kind of a sensation of what they would call, I guess, existential thrownness, where you're kind of like you just wake up in a, or you just find yourself in a situation where you're almost disoriented by like what am I doing here? Like I would kind of wake up and I would think to myself, like, I wonder, why I'm here, why I'm here during this century, why am I embodied in this particular person? And why, when it could have so easily been somewhere else, or I could have easily been someone else.
Right, you could have been
just kind of born
in anywhere, like Australia. You could have been
yeah.
a Tibetan monk.
Yeah, could have been. I mean, theoretically, we could have been anywhere. So I would, but I remember when I was younger, I would wake up and just kind of, you'd take that first conscious breath in the morning and you're kind of like, like what am I doing here living this particular life with these particular ridiculous set of problems?
Yes,
or,
I feel that way all the time.
You do?
Still, I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Particularly,
and I think that was the beginning.
I don't want to go off into a branch just yet. I want to come back to your journey, especially in your late teens. But I think to myself all the time, why is it that I turned out to be someone who's single at this age? None of my relationships really worked out. My life's been generally good, but it's just weird to find yourself in particular circumstances. What you're, and it's so random. It's such a roll of the dice. But maybe I think to myself, maybe it's not a roll of the dice. I like to think that when you die, more of it makes sense. And there was a book I read called, I forgot what it was now, but it was by, I think, Sylvia Brown or something. But she was saying that at the end of your life, you find out that you chose everything when you came into this world because you were trying to learn some kind of a higher lesson. And so you chose out these things that would be the factors in your life in order to learn the higher lesson. Because life would seem so meaningless if there is no lesson to it, if there is no continuance. But anyway, getting back to your journey when you started, would you say it started, when you were a child, when did you even start reading? How old were you when you started reading? It's something you always did as far as for reading not for school. We were all doing that, but I'm saying, were you a reader in high school?
It started before that. I was kind of a voracious reader I remember in elementary school, we would have these book fairs and, the other kids would make fun of me because I would have such large orders. I would just kind of buy one of everything.
I love those books. Did you get those little like thin paper like pamphlets that you open them and it was like a little newspaper, only a 2 pages newspaper, and it would show you all the books that you could get at the book fair. And then the book fair finally came, and you went in, and your parents would have to give you money, and you'd get like a book or whatever. Did that happen in your school?
I would just kind of like pore over it thinking I wanted all of the books, and I'd get as many as I could. And, that doesn't make you, that was before Hermione Granger popularized the young female nerd. So
how much money did your parents give you for these books?
I don't know. I always had a pretty decent allowance considering we were like lower middle Southern, some lower middle class Southerners. My father had a deep understanding of positive reinforcement.
Right.
So if I made straight A's on my report card, he'd just hand me $100 bill.
That's
and
awesome.
then like kind of help me get it broken down and use it for books and things. And it was very reinforcing. If you want someone to repeat a behavior, you should give them a reason. And money being the great equalizer where you can, divvy it up to things that you choose yourself. It was actually a good lesson to teach a child.
Well, your parents were readers, right? Or your father was a reader, right?
He used to be very skilled in history. He was a history major in college, and he was also one of the early adopters of the internet. So he kind
Hmm.
of did computers for his company. Like now that he's much older, he has a little trouble keeping up, but I kind of help him with that.
Right.
But at the time, I have to assume that my love of technology kind of came from his side of the family.
That's great. I've always kind of wept that my parents have just about no interest in reading, but I did, and it didn't really take hold for me until, of course, after high school. Because in high school, the sad thing is they forced books on me that they had no imagination. Maybe they had imagination for what they were, but they were not in the fantasy realm. They could not compete with the Ninja Turtles. They could not compete with the Transformers. They couldn't compete with all those great things we saw on TV as kids. And so they were like, "Oh, you like the Ninja Turtles? Oh, you like the Transformers and the Ghostbusters? You're gonna love the Scarlet Letter. You're gonna you're gonna
Wow, that one's rough.
right. You're gonna love To Kill a Mockingbird. Oh, you're gonna love Jane Eyre, and this is why I failed the 11th grade." But anyway, I
Because
digress.
books were no longer fun for you.
Well, because all they had to do in high school, and they make this mistake in the education system, is find something with a little imagination for the kids to read. Like say, hey, how about Treasure Island? How about Pilgrim's Progress or something? How about Lord of the Rings? How
Yes, I was thinking that one. Yeah.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or some of these other imaginative. The Picture of Dorian Gray is
I love that book.
that is one of
Yes.
my favorite books, but I didn't realize it till I got older. But what I'm saying is, had they pushed something, I don't want to use the word pushed, but have they introduced something to the children that had some imagination to it, it would have been a better high school experience. It would have been a better grade school experience. Um, but anyway, that's a tangent. But so anyway, I wanted to touch on the book fairs and everything, the things that kind of made us. Um, but eventually, we all leave high school, and before we do leave high school and get into the college years for you, um, what stood out for you in high school? What experiences stood out?
Well, I was very outdoorsy considering that, we were just kind of in a small town. Um, so I would go out into like there are woods near my house that are kind of easily accessible. So
You grew up in
I would,
Ashboro, is it?
yeah, but I'm kind of a private person, so I'm gonna just keep that. I'm gonna stop there.
Right.
But
Okay. It's a big city.
um, it's a medium city, I would say, but never mind that. Um, I would go out into the wilderness of my backyard's woods. So, but to me, it was a kind of an expansive kind of, and at the time, you didn't have to really worry about being a young woman alone in the woods because there was really no one else out there but you. And I just kind of made like almost like a cognitive map of my area, like it was my domain, and I would just kind of chill down there. There was a nice kind of bubbling creek not far from where I lived, and I would just kind of march down there and spend a lot of time in solitude. And I would just sit by the river. I would look for crystals. I'd find little bits of quartz, and that would make my day. Like I was, really finding treasures as a young person. And I was heavily influenced by the one thing that I did read in high school that really I really loved was Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and all the transcendentalists. The idea that nature itself could be sacred, and so I would kind of walk the walk, and I would just kind of go out and experience the quietness of being alone in I mean, of course, the woods aren't quiet. There are birds and animals everywhere, but just this nonverbal awareness and consciousness where you really sink into yourself. And that was a big influence, I guess, when I was young on my spirituality. So,
Beautiful. I was just imagining I was there with you. One question that came to mind is, what gave you a knowledge of these minerals, of these stones? It was something you had read into previously before going into the forest?
Yes, I've always been really into crystals in general, just because they're actually really interesting. Like a crystal can grow in a different geometric shape just because of like the nature of what it's made of. Like fool's gold. Everyone's heard of that, right?
Yes.
So that's pyrite, and that can grow in either a clump of messy dodecahedrons, and that'll give you like that fool's gold look, like almost like a clump of gold that you might, get out of a shallow stream. But it can also grow in a cube, but just because of the shape of the molecules. And I even have one, like a little cube of pyrite that just grew that way. And that's something every crystal, depending on what it's made of and what the colorants and the different inclusions are, it will take a different shape and form, and usually it'll be at least kind of resembling a mathematical form, like one of the Platonic solids, one of the, basic shapes, like a dodecahedron, for example. I can't really think of any others.
Fascinating. Really is. I'm going to move
But
on.
I mean, quartz is easy to identify. It's just clear, and it grows in like a pointed shape.
I
So.
remember the kits they sold as children that said "Grow your own crystals," and I always wanted to buy one of those, and I haven't. If anybody wants to send me one, um, IM me because I need to buy one. Honestly, it'd be so much fun. Have you done that too? Have you had the little crystal gardens they sell
Yeah,
online?
well, you don't really even need a kit. You can just are you familiar with the stuff called alum?
No.
It's like you can get it at the grocery store. I think people use it to pickle things. I've never pickled anything with it, but you can mix it into a solution. You'd have to look up a recipe. I don't remember it,
Maybe
but
YouTube, right? These days, everything's on
I'm
YouTube. So
sure I'm sure there's plenty on YouTube about how to grow a crystal, but you can grow alum crystals, which they have a really neat looking shape as well. It's not like a perfect isosahedron, but I remember it being kind of almost like
isn't
isosahedronal.
Cat isn't serpentine a stone?
I'm sorry, I'm just remembering Axl Rose saying that in Welcome to the
No,
Jungle.
no, no. Because
Uh,
but isn't serpentine a stone? Because the thing is, I'm having a flashback of being in a stone store with you one day, and we saw serpentine for sale, and you're like, "My serpentine." So, what?
that
What?
sounds like something I would do.
Right? Is serpentine a stone? Is it?
Oh, let me see. I'm looking it up. A dark green mineral consisting of hydrated magnesium silicate. Yes, it is. Named because it resembles a spotted snake's skin.
Axel. If I ever meet Axel Rose, I'm gonna give him some serpentine. We're like, Axel. So let me ask you this:
uh,
you graduated well, right? You graduated well, high school, and what was
yeah.
it that influenced you to say, "Hey, I'm going to go to college now, and I'm going to be a," because you said you wanted to be a therapist. Was that the goal?
Yeah, at the time I wanted to be a therapist, but I think it was more just that I loved psychology in general and reading about it that motivated me.
You,
But, when I was young, I wasn't quite as connected to my goals as, I mean, an 18-year-old is really there for the experience.
well, right, yeah. I mean, because you've always been someone who liked to have a good time, and you were with your friends in college, and you're having a great time, and going to parties and stuff, and but you were still focused. You still wanted to be the therapist, and you met a lot of. I remember that when we spoke on the phone while you were there, you talked about a lot of influential teachers that you had, and you know, could you maybe touch on
Yeah.
some of that?
Well, I was just talking to my friend Dell, who was my best friend in high school, about this. We were in an environmental science class that we were just very avid diehards about, and I'm getting some feedback on this thing here,
Yeah,
a bit of static. Are you hearing that?
I'm hearing some. We can do a reset if you want to take a break.
Well, let me take you off speaker and see if that works.
Yeah, see how that works.
How does that sound?
Oh, a million times better.
Okay. We had a teacher, an environmental science teacher, who was really inspiring to us, and we were kind of greenlit for a environmental science newsletter that we worked on. And me, having been from Ashboro, where they have a very nice zoo, it's like a no cage, simulated habitat kind of zoo where they try their best to give the animals the kind of surroundings they would have at home. We we had a penny drive and we raised money for the Red Wolves, and we wrote this newsletter on I think it came out every month, but Dell and I were like the editor and the co-editor, and we were highly motivated by the fact that the teacher would allow us to kind of leave class and go work on the green pages instead of do the more dry scientific stuff. I mean, of course, we learned all of that as well. But we were given a lot more freedom than some of the other folks, which I'm sure bred a lot of resentment in them. But we had a good time, and that made it very motivating. So I think that was where most of my mental attention was.
So okay, to clarify, what kind of a newsletter was this?
Environmental science.
Okay.
So,
environmental science, yeah.
Environmental science, like conservation and recycling, and we would go out on field trips and test the water to see the quality of the local streams.
And this was distributed among the college kids?
Oh, no, this was high school.
So this was high school. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so I thought you said, like, to tell you about, like, what I was up to at that time.
Well, yeah. I got a little off track because I was concerned with some of the technical stuff on my end.
Right.
Having to juggle those two. But, yeah, so that's awesome because that ties into what you were saying as far as what your love for nature and going out into the forest and all that stuff and finding different stones and everything. So so you had a connection to the environment, and you got to work on a newsletter with a friend, and that was in high school. And then moving into the college realm, you said that you wanted to study you were studying basically psychology, but you wanted to be a therapist, right?
Well, actually, my first field of study was environmental science.
Really? Okay, so it was environmental science before the therapy. Now, how did that change occur for you? That you said, okay, we're going to go from the environment to more into, helping people and studying people's mental spectrum.
Well, I guess I kind of just got drawn into the attraction of the philosophy of psychology and just wanting to kind of understand what it means to be human. Like the root word of psychology is psyche, which means the human soul. So it's kind of the study of just what it is to be human and have been gifted a human brain when you're born. But I had some people who were close to me who were bipolar, and some people who were close to me in my family who had ended their lives. And I guess I got fascinated with the idea of helping people who were struggling in some way. Mm. And I ended up changing my major, hoping to be, I guess, of some use. But when I did get through grad school and I kind of got a mental health job, my first one, I kind of was in an environment where things were not very it wasn't exactly the most upstanding company one could hope for, and I didn't believe they were doing their best practices for people, and I ended up kind of leaving rather than being caught up in something that I personally considered unethical.
Right, right, okay.
Um, and I ended up teaching instead.
And what were you teaching?
The first thing was, you remember the summer classes for gifted kids, the enrichment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was one of the classes was a psychology class. That was the first one that they hired me for, and it was on the brain and dreaming. So
Mm.
it was kind of a combination of just kind of things that we know about how the brain works and the structure and how memory is stored and that kind of thing, but also a major focus on REM sleep and sleep cycles and what order they come in and how to kind of, time when you wake up to get the most out of what little sleep you get. If you're
Can,
not getting enough, that kind
can
of
I,
thing.
since you've taught a class on it and stuff, can I ask you a few questions about some dreams I've had, and maybe you can kind of give me feedback?
Well, dream interpretation is it's personal, like
Okay.
it, like, okay, if you dream about your teeth falling out, like that could theoretically represent some, specific kind of universal human fears, but it may also have a very specific meaning to you that I might not. It's not
Right.
like divination where you might just
There's
say,
no
oh, that
universal.
means
There's
this
no
one thing. Yeah,
right. There's no universal key. There's not like a great what do they call it, Rosetta Stone of dreaming. A banana
yeah.
to me may mean a banana. A banana to someone else might mean their car, that is big and long and yellow.
And as Freud might say, sometimes a banana is just a banana.
Just a banana, right? But
Yeah.
I've heard that one. So my what do they say? My sir, a cigar
It,
sometimes is just the cigar. Yeah.
it was because someone called, I don't remember who, obviously wasn't there, but it was because someone had called him out on all of his work on the meaning of phallic symbols
Right.
to the subconscious mind. And they pointed out that he always had a cigar he was,
You're sucking on this cigar as
holding in
if
his mouth. Yeah.
mhm.
And he said famously that sometimes a cigar is only a cigar. I'm not really sure 100% if that was true. They didn't teach me that in grad school, but it was a joke that was going around. So,
It's so true. I mean, so many times in life, people are looking into something that we're innocently doing, and we're like, no, no, this is really not what you think it is. That's why that's such a cliche phrase. It's not what you think it is because it seems a certain way. It's funny. Life is funny like that. People
yeah.
catch you in a situation holding something or doing something in a certain position, and how people jump to conclusions. And I wonder how many stories in history where people just mistook something you were doing for something else, and it wasn't that at all.
Yeah. I think sometimes I say a lot of things that don't get understood at face value. Like, I have a student who she has some rather negative opinions of Freud, which are, and she has knowledge of psychology. She worked in the field as well, but she has her opinions for her reasons. Whereas, I was kind of taught by a neo-Freudian who, would kind of lay out the reasons why some of the things that he's demonized for in the present day in the context of the times he was in were actually like far more progressive than they seem to be now looking back. And I think sometimes when I say, well, I don't have as negative of a view of Freud as many people do, and maybe, from the present day, especially from a female perspective, there are reasons to be skeptical of many of the things Freud said, but he was also forced to retract some of his things and twist them into a kind of a different form so as to not be, what do they call it, ridden out of town on a rail for some of his more progressive ideas that he
Right.
had in the beginning.
Well,
He was forced to kind of roll back some of the things he said about the effect of trauma and sexual abuse on the female psyche, which they used to just kind of call hysteria and blame the woman for.
Right.
He was one of the very first people to say, no, this is trauma manifesting and these women were abused. And he, I don't remember all of the details because I studied it about a decade ago, but he was one of the first people to suggest this was victim trauma, and that was not accepted very readily by the community because it was the rich, well-to-do people who could afford therapy who were the perpetrators of the abuse.
Right. That makes sense.
Like the family members of the abuse.
They didn't want to accept it, and then they'd have to...
Well, they didn't want to be accused of molesting their nieces and things.
Right.
So so Freud was, had to kind of roll back some of that and develop the absurd theory of wish fulfillment. And it came off like after he kind of twisted it into a more palatable form for the patriarchy, I guess. It no longer meant what he had originally said, and it came out very victim blaming. So
it came out what?
Kind of like blaming the victim rather than originally highlighting that these people were not just crazy out of nowhere, but were reacting to some very real traumas in their life.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
So yeah, there's my neo-Freudian rant.
That makes sense. Yeah, what you said totally made sense to me. That they were trying to almost cover up these dark.
Not almost, but definitely.
Definitely, they were trying to cover up the crimes, saying these women are just crazy, but really they were victims of abuse.
Yeah, and that can have some very, very dramatic and noticeable symptoms. Trauma is. The body holds on to trauma for years and years and years.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I mean, some people, honestly, they'll never fully recover.
That's true.
And that's sad. Definitely is.
But yeah, I mean, some people have very different views of Freud, and that's okay. But I think that no matter what you're thinking about in psychology, you have to kind of think about the era that it came from.
Right.
And was it progressive for its time? And did it get rolled back a little bit from the original,
Right.
the original intent of the person who came up with it? So.
Right. And it got rolled back because they didn't want the spotlight on their dark deeds.
It would have been professional suicide for Freud to blame the rich, wealthy men who were paying his bills for the trauma of his patients. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to go backwards a little bit. You said you were able to teach the dream class for the gifted youth, correct?
Yeah.
What's it like? Tell us the story. Tell us the story about what it was like working with. Now, how old were these children?
It depends. In the psych class, they were between 15 and 17. It was an enrichment class for kids who wanted to get into a good college. It was an expensive program, so they were gifted in, just other ways, like having extra money, like several $1,000s to drop on a 3-week summer enrichment program.
Can you touch on the topic matters in your classes? Like maybe there's some of the things some of the literature or some of the principles you talked about in those classes.
I actually brought in a lot of Jungian psychology and the idea of archetypes. Archetypes being kind of these repeated forms that come up over and over again in all of their stories and all of their dreams. And like Joseph Campbell's A Hero with 1,000 Faces. The idea that
that's a book?
The hero's journey is kind of told again and again in other cultures and all different times throughout history, but has kind of a similar structure.
I see. Was it?
Are you looking up Hero with 1,000 Faces?
No, I can, because I was kind of, I was curious about the book, Hero of 1,000 Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. This is what Google has to say. Hero with a Thousand Faces is a work of comparative mythology by Joseph Campbell in which the author discusses his theory of the mythological structure of the journey of the archetypal hero found in myth and world myths.
Yeah. Well, it's like the idea that if you want to know about the psyche of a culture, you read their myths.
That makes sense because dreams are influencing them, even to what they write, and also not just the dreams, but their waking life as well. So,
yeah, and also that their mythology is how they interpret and structure their world, especially ancient cultures that, had a very different view of maybe how things were created or what things are made of, life itself, that kind of thing.
So did the students in the class, because they weren't really children, they were older, did the students share their dreams in the class? Was that part of the class too, to share your dreams, or was that more private?
A little bit of both. They would write in a dream journal. A lot of them, they were exhausted. It was a very immersive program, so half of them would still be, kind of half asleep in the class, which was ironic.
I want to
through no fault of their own. They were just worked very hard over the summer, like being expected to be at a class at 8 a.m. for.
Let me dissect this a little bit.
Extended time.
Let me dissect this a little bit on a personal level. So the hero's journey, right? Does that mean like good versus evil, like questing to accomplish some kind of a goal? Because I'm thinking back to some of my dreams, and let me give you an example. But I'll throw out a couple of my dreams, just not long, just ideas, and maybe try to plug that into the hero's journey. So I've had a reoccurring dream that I'm shot, and every time I get shot in the dream, I don't die. I just think I'm going to die. Also, a recurring dream would be for me that I meet the woman of my dreams, and then I always wake up, at a crucial moment when we're kissing or something. And then I've had dreams where, I fly, or recently I had this dream where a bridge came out of a river, and I was able to cross the river. Now, would these principles tie into the hero's journey? Like, for instance, the hero's journey, like a bridge coming out of the water is something like a hero would do and cross into the next realm to go on this journey to accomplish something. And, of course, the gunfire would represent some kind of opposition, like the enemy's coming at me. So is this what you're saying? Like, it all ties into a hero's journey? Is that...
Not always. I mean, it definitely could, but hold on, it's a little fuzzy again. Is that better?
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily mean that every dream would be the hero's journey, but more the stories we tell and the way we kind of structure the stories that we tell ourselves. So it might tie in even more with what you said about the stories that actually did appeal to you when you were young, that they were more fantasy-based, where there may be, like a quest for something sacred and you have to accomplish something
the quest for
in
love,
order to
too.
restore balance.
I think we're all on a quest for love, right?
Not all of us all the time, but, that it would be nice. Some people...
What is life if not love, right?
Well,
food.
There are some people, like maybe if you're looking at it from like a Jungian standpoint, that would say that if you meet your soulmate in a dream, you're actually encountering part of yourself. And Jung postulated that within every male psyche, there is this concept of the female that is from within, and they call that for males the anima. I mean, this is a bit heteronormative for these times, and I would say that it's not automatically always the opposite gender, or or even a binary.
Right, of course.
But that within our psyche, we contain what might be considered a different gender than the one we express within our psyche, and that we can encounter this in dreams and be given some form of knowledge or healing by encountering this almost symbiotic part of our psyche.
I, 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 I just really
Did
want
that
to.
make sense? I kind of went in a circle there.
Well, I honestly, just so my audience probably knows that my name's Wild Eric for a reason because I'm not always. I mean, I do my best to follow a conversation, but I don't think you can capture every nuance in a conversation there because our brains, especially artist brains, tend to branch out and get a little ADD for a second. But I can tell you this: I definitely want to read this book now. And again, it's called "The Hero with a Thousand Faces" by Joseph Campbell.
Hmm. But that deals with mythology more than dreams. But if you want to read about dreams, I would recommend a few, just whatever floats your boat that
recommend
was
some
written by
books.
Carl Jung.
Yeah, recommend some dream books for the people out there. Carl Jung.
I don't remember the titles off the top of my head. Hold on.
But Carl Jung, you said, is definitely someone they should check out. I mean,
Are you familiar with him at all?
well, yeah, I know that it was Carl Jung, and who was the other one that they were so famous for? Well, wasn't it Jung
Well, since
and Freud that were
yeah,
they knew they knew each other.
He was Freud's protege, his friend, and
Right.
also his nemesis.
Carl Jung, right?
It's actually a pretty interesting story. He brought Jung under his wing as a younger psychiatrist, and then their belief systems started to really deviate from each other wildly. And they had a bit of a rivalry and a falling out that was actually rather dramatic. They say that Freud once fainted in Jung's presence from just the stress.
Wow. I heard somebody told me that there's speculation that they had a romantic relationship.
Well, there was definitely speculation that Freud in particular did have some, homoerotic or bi-erotic feelings for Jung, being his, young, exciting protege.
Right.
But that maybe that was kind of repressed given the times they were in, and maybe, they weren't able to explore that in the way that people might be able to in the modern era.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of scales, and a spectrum of it. Maybe it was a man crush. Maybe it was a little more,
Well, maybe he didn't feel at liberty to express these feelings.
because of the times, yeah.
And that's what I mean by the times,
Now, what year was it that, these men were hanging out? Was this late 1800s?
Well, Jung lived from 1875 to 1961.
Ah, okay.
And the psychology he was credited for, creating, the perspective he was credited for creating was called analytical psychology. And he was the one who popularized the idea that I was talking about before about the anima and the animus, which just kind of means that we're more holistic beings than just the kind of limited gender expressions that we may, kind of have during our waking lives. That unconsciously we also possess qualities that people would say, like I can at times be very assertive and confident, which people would say are masculine traits.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That we contain these traits that might not be expressed consciously all the time. And that would make them unconscious. That's what that means. That we're not conscious that we have certain traits and abilities, because we don't use them in our day-to-day lives very often. That would be kind of what he would call the shadow self.
Poetically, I like the phrase of the
you would like
shadow self.
You would like Jung in particular. And there's even a kind of a branch of therapy called shadow work, which means accessing and kind of working with the things in us, in our psyches, that we either don't admit to having or we disown for some reason.
I'd like to say that to a woman after a nice romantic evening. Show me your shadow self. Show me
it's best
what
to get it out of the way early
means.
instead of during a nasty divorce. You know what I mean?
In
Like
your soul. The beautiful shadows. Not all shadows are dark and evil. There's a beauty in shadows, I think. Peter Pan's shadow.
Well, you're right. You're right, because the shadow self and shadow material in the psyche is not necessarily evil. It's just that which you don't really own up to in
Yes,
your conscious life.
yes,
So,
yes.
so maybe if, let's say you're like a professional bodybuilder,
Your
and
inner garden, your secret garden.
let's say you work a lot on being, a very strong and capable person that doesn't, really acknowledge your emotions. You kind of walk it off, as they might say. Some of that boys don't cry stuff that The Cure brought up in that song that I love.
Right.
And then your vulnerability and your ability to express kind of negative emotions or cry in front of people, all of that would be, hypothetically, in this particular instance, maybe that which you don't show people and hide, even maybe from yourself, and that would make it your shadow. That wouldn't make being vulnerable evil or bad or wrong. It just might be something that you feel you can't do because you might feel that you need to be strong at all times.
Kat, I saw this episode of The Twilight Zone once where this guy was making this woman cry into a vial, so he was trying to rid the world of sadness. And then she found out that after she filled the one bottle with tears, she couldn't be sad anymore because she somehow discovered that was his whole scheme. And so she like ran out of his house with a vial of tears, and then she dropped it. But I don't think it was the best Twilight Zone episode, but for some reason it came into my brain. I'm sorry. Okay. Listen, I want to go on.
Let's name our first album Vial of Tears.
Vial of Tears.
It's going to have to be goth.
Since we're talking about tears and goth, I want to dive directly into the source of that, which is basically love and all of its madness. So remember the book, there was a book and a teacher that you took a class, if you want to tell us more about that, and he talked about something called limerence, and there was a specific book that we had talked about in the past, and it was very fascinating, and I really wanted to get the book, but I forgot what it was. But if you say it on the podcast now, I'll never forget, and I'm going to type it into Google. So do you remember what book I'm talking about?
Yeah, but before I tell you that, I'm going to tell you, you asked me for some books by Jung.
Ooh, yes, go ahead.
The first one that I actually do remember from school was Modern Man in Search of a Soul.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a few others. Memories, Dreams, and Reflections was another one that I just kind of pulled parts out of for that class. And it just kind of depends on what you're into. He did one called Man and His Symbols, and another one called Psychology and Alchemy. I have not read that one, but it sounds pretty interesting. And then, of course, one of the earliest works, the more groundbreaking, kind of laying the groundwork, was just called The Psychology of the Unconscious. So
Cool.
It's been 10 years since I taught that class, so I had to look up a reminder.
Well, it's cool.
And the book,
Refresher, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he wrote like several things, so I didn't remember them all.
Well, he is famous for that. I mean, I know the name. I've never read any of his. I mean, I've never read any of Sigmund Freud either. I mean, the only thing I've read I didn't read it by Freud, but I mean, I remember Freud was in Bill and Ted, The Excellent Adventure. But
yeah, with a cigar.
And then I've heard stories about Freud from different teachers and speakers, but yeah, I need to dive into it myself.
Well, I'm not like a defender of Freud, but I was told in grad school that his original theory had been a lot more in defense of these people who were being called hysterical and who were not being given a voice, and then was kind of forced to recant that and twist it into what we now understand today as this wish fulfillment fantasy, which is very victim blaming.
Now, I want to steer you a little further because the clock is ticking, and we have only about we have another 60 minutes to close the podcast before my lovely Airbnb host has to go to sleep.
You just wanted to know the name of the book. It's Love and Limerence by Dorothy Tenov.
Love and Limerence by Dorothy Tenov. Is she Russian?
I'm not sure.
Tenov, it sounds...
I don't believe... I mean, Russian. She might have been originally, but...
Let's see.
She certainly writes well in English, I'll just put it that way.
It says, it deals with the subject in an entirely new way. Originally released 20 years ago, Love and Limerence has become a classic in the psychology of emotion, and it is a self-help book. That sounds awesome. I remember, is there a quote that you told me years ago, and it says something like, if you tell me how to make love stay, I'll show you how to capture the moon, or something like
I'll
that?
show you the purpose of the moon. Yeah, I think that was Tom Robbins.
So tell us about the book, Love and
Still,
Limerence, and what do you recall of it? And also tell us about the teacher who introduced you to the book.
you're jumping a little ahead.
I'm sorry.
The quote that you remembered was "Tell me how to make love stay, and I'll tell you the purpose of the moon." I'm pretty sure. Now, I didn't look this up to check, but I'm pretty sure that was Tom Robbins, who wrote a book called "Still Life with Woodpecker," um, and many other books. Still Life
So that's a
with
different book.
Woodpecker. It's named like a painting might be named. Um, and then what was the other question?
Well, how did you come across this book? Was it because of a class you took? I thought you, when we first talked
Yeah.
about it, you were in a class. There was a teacher, and you guys shared a lot of different thoughts on the nature of love and attraction. And I would love to
It
just.
wasn't about attraction per se. It was okay. So we were taking a class on emotions. I don't remember the name of it, but all of my friends were there. It was a very tight-knit department full of interesting and very intelligent misfits. And it was a humanistic and transpersonal type program, which means that rather than being obsessed with this kind of like results-driven therapy that is easy to bill insurance companies for, if that makes sense, we were more focused on kind of the totality of human experience, and it's called person-centered therapy, where you know are maybe less attached to the outcome and maybe more interested in the health of the individual, increasing, you know, as almost like the psychology of wellness
Are you still on
rather
speakerphone,
than
by the way, or no?
yeah, let me get my ear was getting tired. Let me go back.
I'm sorry, and we can
Is that
even.
better?
Yeah, we can even shorten it a little bit. But when you go to speakerphone, you sound like you're collecting coins in a can.
I'm from Mars. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So I was at a program that is not necessarily as marketable as some of the more cognitive behavioral therapies of the day that are easy to bill for in the modern kind of medical model era. Not that there's anything wrong with CBT or being interested in results as opposed to wellness in general, but the program had almost I don't know, kind of a flavor to it that was a bit more open-minded to some of the more intangible qualities of the human health and well-being. So we were studying, I don't remember the name of the class, emotions in general. The person who taught the class was my thesis supervisor at the time. Actually, no, he approached me and asked me if I wanted to write a thesis about this, because he had kind of seen what I had written about the topic and thought it would have been a good field of study for me. And that was after we read few segments of the book in the class. And since we were studying human emotion, we kind of went the gamut from early, I don't know, like Greek philosophy about it, which I found dry and boring. Not that all Greek philosophy was, but their approach to emotion was very stoic and a little dry, in my opinion. And then when we got to Dorothy Tinov, she had a lot of anecdotal story, written word of people who kind of had experienced limerence in a certain way. And that made it very easy to understand from a personal perspective. Like you're like looking into the experience of these people and what they had to say about what they went through during their obsessive love dramas. So, and she coined the phrase limerence. Before that, people didn't really differentiate the like distinction between these obsessive loves that a lot of love songs are about. You
So
know, this one love song.
is limerence somewhere in between love, a crush, and obsession, or
No,
is it obsession?
it's the obsessive part.
Mm.
So, you know those songs that are like, I hate this song. The one that's like, I can't breathe without you. Like these like very codependent, obsessive, like I'll die if you don't reciprocate kind of songs.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a great example from my absolute favorite band in the world, Creep by Radiohead.
Okay, yeah.
That is limerence. Like the
He's
object of his affection being the limerent object.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
when she walks into the room, he can't talk, he can't breathe, he becomes a creep, he becomes too socially inept to
Right.
even interact with this creature.
He's putting her on a pedestal.
Well, he didn't put her there. It's just kind of a psychological reaction to someone that you're that attracted to. It doesn't mean the person is like, an 11 in a room full of tens. What it means is like you develop this obsessive, love-like state that far surpasses, the affection of just regular love bond in general, and gets into the point where you've heard the whole like, I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't think without you, that kind of thing.
Right.
They have intrusive thoughts
I've never had a problem
about the
not eating,
person.
by the way.
I think I can't remember the quote verbatim, but it basically it's limerence resembles a love-like state that closely resembles love, but is far more like obsession.
Hmm. I've had some
Why did you
limerence.
bring it up? What are you wanting to get at?
Well, what I wanted to get at is I always thought it was fascinating, and I always wanted to read this book, and I wanted to just kind of pick your brain about it and talk about it. Let's move away from the book and talk about personal experiences. What I find fascinating these days, and I know you've had a lot of different love experiences too, and then when you and I first met, you were actually counseling me on a love experience, my first major love experience when I was a 21-year-old, and it was my first love, and I was going through a breakup, and you kind of, talked me through it and gave me some good advice about knowing my own self-worth and so forth. But these days, what's been on my heart and mind lately is just how amazing attraction is. Because you're not always, at least for me, I don't know if this is true for everyone or for you. Maybe I can ask you if it's true for you. But I'm not always attracted to the most beautiful person I see. I can't explain what it is. There's just certain people I'm attracted to, and then certain people I'm not. And it doesn't matter what they look like, as far as the scale of Hollywood and the media. There's people who are just obviously geometrically pleasing, but that is not really. Even though I can say yes, this is what is considered beautiful, this is what's considered not. I never know who I'm going to be attracted to. And it's only like one out of every 1,000. Is that normal? I mean, what's going on there? Are you like
Well,
that too or no?
evolutionarily speaking, if we were all only attracted to the most attractive person available in a certain, community, then no one would get a date except the two or three more most attractive people in town. Like, if we were all only attracted to beauty and that was it, or symmetry or whatever.
Is it pheromones?
I mean, that's one layer of it, but then you wouldn't be able to explain people who fall in love, online or whatever.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I just thought it was
Well,
fascinating.
I mean,
Because
there are
I
some
meet these
people who
women.
say that a great deal of love, in the early stages of the love bond, you're projecting your inner psyche onto them. And
Mm,
if they exhibit a trait that you think means a certain thing, like if you're attracted to someone who, I don't know, likes to parachute or something out of a plane, like maybe that's a big interest of yours,
yeah,
and
but
you
no, no,
you
no.
might.
listen,
assume they have the qualities that you associate
I
with that, such
I
as
have
being
met.
daring, etc.
Tell me if you've experienced this. Have you ever met someone that you had so much in common with, and on paper it seems like it should have worked, and they're really attractive, but then you get around them and there's just nothing. There's no spark, and then you'll meet somebody who maybe is not so much someone who has a lot in common with you, but you have a couple things, but there's just something you can't explain. Can I share a quote? This is my favorite quote on love. Can I share it with you?
Of course you can. It's your podcast. Go for
Well,
it.
you're right. Well, okay. Well, look, it's from Star Trek Voyager,
Okay.
and it is the best quote on love I've ever heard. So, even so much that I actually put it on YouTube myself. I think the only person in the world that captured that exact quote and put it on YouTube. Let's see. Neelix's love quote. If you Google that, it'll usually come up.
Felix, wasn't he the one in love with the Dr. Bashir? No, that's a different guy. That was the Cardassian.
That's Garrick, yeah. And
I know nothing about this show except I ship it.
well,
That one
well,
pairing. Yeah.
you know a bit about Star Trek TNG. You were a big fan of Jean-Luc Picard and all that stuff. Now,
Yeah. I watched that one pretty thoroughly.
this one is the one with Captain Janeway, Star Trek Voyager, it's a fantastic show if you give it time. But there's a character named Neelix, and he's a Talaxian. Anyway, the point is he's talking to Chakotay about this, and there's an episode where Chakotay falls in love with a woman, and then she forgets everything, and they try to recreate the situation so they can fall in love again, but they can't. They can't recreate. You can't stand in the same river twice.
I was just thinking that. You can't walk in the same river twice.
Exactly. So here
And that's
is the
yeah,
quote.
the answer, I guess.
You're going to love this quote. Okay. He says, I don't think you can analyze love. It's the greatest mystery of all. No one knows why it happens or doesn't. Love is a chance combination of elements. Any one thing might be enough to keep it from igniting. A mood, a glance, a remark. And if we could define love, predict it, it would probably lose its power.
Well, I mean, I agree. The best we can do is analyze limerence, which is a love-like state, but is not love itself.
No.
We can study the effects of love gone wrong, but we can't really. The nature of actual love would be ineffable.
Ineffable. I forgot the meaning
Yeah.
of that. I like the word.
It means something that cannot be explained or described or fully known.
Because I thought maybe a great definition would be something incapable of being effed.
Effed?
Yeah, you're uneffable. I cannot be
Wait,
effed.
are you telling me you have not yet watched Good Omens by Neil Gaiman? You need to get on that, my friend.
I love David Tennant. I know he's in that. I've watched one episode, and it was really good. And I've also watched...
David Tennant is just the icing on that cake. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful exploration of religion and faith, and
I enjoy Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
I didn't watch Sandman, but what I did watch, because I absolutely love Ian McShane, I watched American Gods season 1.
That was fantastic.
I did not watch season 2, but I watched season 1.
Did you get to the part where they had like 17 different Jesuses?
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's
I enjoyed Neil Gaiman's very respectful interpretation of many different faith traditions.
well, and that's the thing, if you do something respectful, that's what I'm all about, because we all have our own personal beliefs, but it's so important to respect each other's beliefs and lifestyles. And because I like to think of it like this: there's a big forest, and we're all in the forest, but we've all entered the forest from different paths, and we're all trying to get to the center of the forest where the light is, where the knowledge is, where the secrets of the universe are, but we're all coming from different angles and different pathways and meeting different ways of different people along it, and we're all trying to get there.
The hero with 1,000 faces.
Is that really what they're talking about there? Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. And so that we just have to be sensitive and not take... So many people just they get these big heads, and they get so full of themselves that they think that their way is greater than someone else's way. And what's that thing that Bruce Lee used to say? He said, enlightenment is like a finger pointing to the moon. Don't concentrate.
That wasn't just Bruce Lee. That's a Buddhist concept that has been repeated by many a teacher.
Yes, but
yes,
you didn't let me
Bruce
finish
Lee
the quote.
probably also said that.
You have to finish the quote. You can't interrupt the quote without finishing it. So
I'm sorry.
So
I couldn't believe you ascribed that to Bruce Lee alone.
Well, it's
Go
in
ahead,
his movie.
finish the quote.
It's in his movie.
Finish it for the world,
No.
and then we'll.
Bruce
we'll
Lee. Bruce Lee was a philosophy major, and yes, that's why probably he stole it, and he didn't give credit in the movie.
He didn't steal it. My Buddhist psychology
he
professor
borrowed it.
taught it to me. It's a common Buddhist phrase. Go ahead
It's
and
like a
say the
finger
full thing
pointing to the
before we
moon.
go there.
Don't concentrate on the
Okay.
finger, unless you will miss
The
out
teachings
on all
of the okay,
heavenly glory.
this is it. I'm gonna do it for you. The teachings of the Dharma are not they are just a finger pointing to the moon. They are not the moon itself.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Right.
And what that would mean is not to get caught up in the dogma of how to be the perfect Buddhist or religious person of any faith tradition. Not to get caught up in the rules and the stories as much as the truth behind them. The real truth being that the teaching is just the finger pointing at the moon and not the moon itself.
Exactly.
Yes. I didn't think you were ever going to say it, so I had to go there.
Well, look, now that we've touched on Star Trek and all that, let's go into the fandoms, because we have, let's see, I'm looking at the clock here.
All right, well, I'm going to start here. The reason I brought up Neil Gaiman when I said ineffable is because there's
Ineffable.
a long-running joke.
You are
There's
ineffable.
a long-running joke in Good Omens where the angel, the demon will question the angel on what's going on in the story, often with a valid moral point. And the angel will simply say that it's ineffable, which means he has no idea why God's doing it that way. They just did, So
I'm going to read the definition. Ineffable. Too great or extreme to be expressed or described in words.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. A lot of things that I think about are ineffable.
Yes, I know. I thought you'd like that.
But if you're a eunuch, you're also ineffable because you cannot be effed.
That's very a cruel way to describe the differently abled.
Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I'll apologize.
Especially since most people don't volunteer for that.
Okay.
It was
Kat has always
fun
put
not
me,
intended thrust upon them.
Throughout my life, Kat has always put me in line, and I have always humbly backpedaled and said, "You're right, Kat," because
Fair enough.
she has greater sensitivities and perspectives, and I was just trying to tell a silly joke, but I want
it would have been a good pun, except I have too much empathy toward the historical
and
eunuchs of the world.
Well, some of my greatest, my favorite characters in Game of Thrones, the spider, Lord Varys, was a eunuch. So if he was here, he'd be like, "I don't appreciate that joke, sir."
Well, you remember he didn't take too kindly to the guy that did it to him. He, in fact, captured him, and no spoilers.
That was great.
Yeah.
I love that, yeah.
Things occurred that were unpleasant for this person.
Right, and you know what? There could be eunuchs who are actually, listening right now, and I'm... Okay. No one is ineffable.
It went out of popularity after the castrati singers kind of went out of fashion, and rightfully so. That's a rough thing to do to a growing person.
We have to forgive our
Perhaps
comedians.
we should move on.
Right. So, okay, let's talk about some fandoms here.
Okay.
I know that we both love the show Star Trek: The Next Generation. You were a big fan also. Correct me if I'm wrong. Weren't you a big fan of Supernatural? Or no?
I was, yes.
I never actually, I only seen a couple episodes of that show, but here's the thing, you know what, these days, what really gets me, like, I don't have the time to devote myself to an entire series. To watch all of, like, say, Supernatural, you would need, like, months to watch it all. It's a commitment. But have you seen it all?
I believe so, yes. Yes, actually. But
it's worth
I
it,
will
right?
say... Since we were talking about kind of some Buddhist advice, um, I was taught by my Buddhist psychology professor that you should try not to be attached to the outcome of your endeavors. It
Mm.
doesn't mean that you're not interested in the outcome, but if you sit down to watch a show, just sit down and watch that episode. Don't worry about whether or not you're going to make it through all 15 seasons, because first of all, it doesn't matter if you do or not.
That's true.
Just try to enjoy that episode.
Right, that's true. And one of my favorite actors from Battlestar Galactica is in Supernatural. I don't know his name, but he played the devil, I think.
Oh wait, is it Matthew? Wait, no, Mark Shepard.
Let's look him up. Mark
Did he
Shep.
have a just
Yes.
delicious voice? Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Mark
He was
Shepard.
quite wonderful
When he
in
had,
all of his work.
oh my God, he's still working, I'm sure. Mark
Yeah,
Shepard.
yeah. He left the show, but you know that
He
the
left the
show
show?
the show has well, it ended. The show has
Oh,
ended. I'm not going to drop any more spoilers.
oh, sorry.
The show has ended, therefore he has moved
Did
on.
you see
Um,
Battlestar Galactica from like
Not
2009?
yet.
Okay. Well, he's in that
Um,
toward the end.
and you know, the whole thing, like, don't be attached to the outcome. I've had to kind of take that and apply it just to enjoying entertainment because you never know when something's going to be canceled in this day and age.
Kat, that is such a great philosophy for everything, and that you've always been so good at just taking like something like just any subject and then putting a great philosophical lesson into it. It's so true. Don't be afraid to go out and try something just because you're not going to be able to
Yeah.
complete the whole thing. And that even ties into relationships. It's like, hey, not all relationships are supposed to be forever. Some of them are supposed to be this beautiful
Yeah.
season.
Yes. And you asked me about my relationships. I'm not going to get into it per se, but I try to appreciate the person while they're around. And I tend to fall in love by accident. I don't really go, not that there's anything wrong with seeking someone to be with, and there's nothing wrong with doing that online or with apps, but when I do meet people, it tends to be like oops, now
It's
now I'm with them.
It's so much better
So,
as an accidental surprise. I think
yeah.
romantically speaking, everybody wants to stumble upon love like this great surprise that they never saw coming.
I don't really worry about it because, I'm fine either way. And, I feel like working on yourself in the meantime is the best thing you can do. Um, and when I think about like, don't be too attached to the outcome, just care more about the process of your endeavors and improving and learning as you go. That really helped me as a potter, because a lot of times you'll work very hard on something and it fails through some random thing that happens in the kiln or whatever. And you've got to just kind of be like, well, and do it again, just make another one. And,
Yeah.
if you have to take it outside and smash it, go ahead. It'll be biodegradable. It'll,
Yeah,
you know, um,
Spinal Tap has a song, Just Begin Again.
yeah. And
And
that's how
yeah,
that's how you gain skills and that's how you survive. And,
we've got to do that,
um,
yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, and I think it would help if you're meeting someone that you do think could theoretically work out. I mean, if you're not attached to the outcome, no one likes it if you're asking, so where is this going on the third date?
You're so right. You're so
There's
right.
certain steps. Yeah, you need to, take your steps in order there.
Exactly. It can't be this, you can't force a definite. That's crazy. You have to just let
Yeah.
things grow
And you can't prove a negative.
It has to grow and die naturally. You can't prove a negative. What does that mean?
Yeah. Oh, it's kind of like, like you can't, let's say you meet someone who believes in the flying spaghetti monster, for example. Like, you've heard of this little flying spaghetti
Yes.
monster thing,
Yes,
right?
I believe in it. Yeah.
Okay, so you could prove that it was there. Like, if it appeared and it was real, to everyone's great surprise, you could prove that because you'd be like, here's the evidence right here that it showed up on this day. And you make a monument or whatever. But you can't prove that it's not there because you can't prove the negative. You can't prove the absence of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is it like Schrodinger? What's it called? Schrodinger's cat?
Well, that's one of my favorite thought experiments to talk about, but that wasn't where I was going with it at the moment.
But isn't it
But we
like
could talk about that if you want.
But isn't that similar? Because you can't prove that.
Well,
no.
with Schrodinger's cat, that was actually Schrodinger pointing out the absurdities that the logical absurdities that arise from some of the results of the experiments people had done in the like double slit experiment, where they're like, sending a particle through a chamber with two slits, and if it's one particle, it should have to choose, right? Like one slit or the other to travel through.
Right.
And then hit this photoelectric plate on the other side, which is, going to record whether or not it did one thing or the other. So basically, with the double slit experiment, what they ended up with, instead of the particle like going through, choosing left or right, and then hitting in one place on the other side, what they ended up with was like more of it resembled an interference pattern of like two different waves like interacting with itself. And thus, it kind of, the conclusion that was drawn was that the particle went through both and neither, which is a logical impossibility, right? If it's one particle.
Right.
And so when he came up with Schrodinger's cat to kind of highlight the fact that one particle simply cannot, choose one and the other simultaneously and still be one thing, which is where basically if you put a cat in a box, which I'm against, you put a cat in a box, close the box with a vial of poison and a little hammer. Now, this was imaginary. It's a thought experiment. No one would do this.
Right.
They better not. Anyway. But theoretically, in this imagined experiment, if you put a cat in a box with a vial of poison and a hammer that will break the vial of poison and kill this poor creature, if the particle chooses, let's say, the left, and if it goes through the right, the cat will be fine. If the actual results of the experiment were they sent this particle through a double slit plate and it was forced to choose, but the actual results they got were something more like an interference pattern where it did both and neither simultaneously, and thus they had to put a photoelectric plate at the end of this, chamber for the double slit experiment, which was something that you can do. The cat part is imaginary. But the photoelectric plate was there to record like where I don't think it was an electron, probably a photon, ended up. Then the photoelectric plate shows this pattern of a wave interfering with itself. Then Schrodinger said, in this instance, if that's the result you get, then the cat is both alive and dead simultaneously. And he didn't say that would really happen. That's impossible. He was simply highlighting the absurdity of the actual results people were getting from these quantum experiments.
Right.
So he was just trying to say, like, look, this is these results you're getting and the conclusions you're making are insane. And I think, if I remember correctly, and I may not, but I think this emerged out of his discussions with Einstein regarding that issue.
Okay.
If I heard this correctly, I haven't read Schrodinger's cat, and I read a book called In Search of Schrodinger's Cat, where I got some of this. Also, I got some of this just from the physics guys that I knew at Appalachian State. The first person that sat me down and told me this was just some guy.
Thank you for sharing about Schrodinger's cat. I mean, we could probably continue with that, but we have a half an hour left. So what I'd like to do now is I want to touch on just a few more subjects, and I definitely want to get to your pottery. But before we get to the pottery, though, I want to talk about your radio show, because for a while you had a radio show. And do you still have your radio show?
No, I graduated from my second degree that I got at that particular college. I went back as an alumni and I got a degree in the ceramic arts. I had already had a degree from the same college in psychology. And then while I was there, I had a radio show called Punk Rock Existentialism.
Awesome name.
And it was what it sounded like. It was mostly punk, but a lot of, industrial and goth and post-punk and just general late 90s weirdness thrown in.
Did you hear the Sisters of Mercy are on tour?
I did not.
Isn't that insane?
Well, they're probably quite advanced in years, but I would still be willing to check them out if I could.
I was totally going to go to the concert, but they're not playing anywhere in Norway, so...
Right.
Right.
People might not get out that far very often.
The Sisters of Mercy, I don't know. Yeah. But no, tell us
probably
tell
see
us about your
him.
show. Tell us what kind of bands stood out that you played and the experience of being a radio DJ.
The experience of it was you'd get a lot of interesting calls. And for my particular show, you'd get a lot of people calling up, and it'd be like really older punks, like, in their 70s and 80s. And they'd be like, I haven't heard this song in like 30 years.
Because you played some really deep cuts from like the 70s, late 70s.
Yeah, anywhere from the 70s on up to like last year.
And what bands stand out for you from the punk movement?
That's a big question.
Because everybody wants to say Sex Pistols and the Ramones.
No,
but
actually,
there's a lot more than that. The Lords of the New Church.
I didn't play a lot of Sex Pistols because, oh man, I don't want to get into it. It's pretty divisive. That's not the
Damned. Was it the boy? Not the Boys. What are they called?
I played a lot of like Bad Religion and Rancid, and but also everything
Boys.
like really really old stuff. Yeah, like old stuff from the CBGB's era. Like the Dead Boys, but also stuff that had just come out, like Titus Andronicus, things like that, or Amyl and the Sniffers.
Amyl Nitrate. Amyl.
That was a more recent album that we had, and it just happened to like already be in the system because it was in rotation. They tried to keep it.
I'm looking that up. Amyl and the Sniffers.
Yeah.
Amyl.
And then there was one called Bad Cop, Bad Cop. That was fun. But some of them were already in the system and in rotation, but I ended up applying for a specialty show, and then I didn't have to worry about what was in rotation.
But
I played really old stuff as well.
AMYL.
I got a lot of flack for playing the Ramones, but I also got a lot of like calls, of people thanking me for playing something other than I want to be sedated.
Right, exactly. Listen, the Ramones definitely are a pillar of early punk and everything, and they're in a league of their own, the Ramones, but they don't really show you the whole library of punk that was coming out in that time.
Well, I would do horror punk on Halloween, and I would do there are like some funny Christmas songs. Like I'd do like my favorite one. I can't remember exactly who did it, but it was called "Oi to the World." I'd always play that on Christmas. And then I don't know, some of the Cramps on Halloween, things like that. So.
Right, the Cramps. I think the Cramps that were in the news recently. I think maybe a member died or something.
I mean, they were, they'd been around a while. I wouldn't be 100% surprised, but
it's hard to be a punk rocker and live, but a lot of them have. Yeah, I heard Billy Idol got back with Generation X recently to do a show.
That's probably the case. We had some fun with him and whether or not he was really punk.
Right. Punk attitude.
I try not to be one of those. I try not to be too gatekeeper in like what is punk and what isn't. Like, for me, it's really. I feel like if you care too much about what is and isn't punk, you lose sight of what it's really about, which is supposed. U2
used to be considered punk when they first came out.
I don't think so. I don't think that ever happened. I mean, people might have said that, but I don't think they,
Well, that's what I'm
you
saying.
know,
Like people want to say, "Oh,
would have
you're punk."
self-identified
Yeah,
as punk.
and then there
Well,
was even like
okay.
a one of those TV commercials saying, "You want to get the punk hits," and there was all these bands on there that were not punk.
Well, it's funny. Like you end up like it. Like usually it'll just come out by accident. Like I'm just kind of this like mild-mannered pottery teacher, but the weirdest things happen. Like I had a guy that I knew from the radio station just walk in to my class a few weeks ago, and he was a great guy, really nice, and he had a good punk show too. And he just kind of wandered in looking for a place to get pottery lessons for his son. And he was super sweet. He turned to my class and was like, "Oh, she had a good show." And I was like, "Thank you." But then I kind of had to tell them like, "Yeah, I was like a punk rock DJ. Here I sit in my, unassuming lavender blouse teaching pottery and underneath,
You were
yeah, I like
exposed.
raging punk rock."
You were
Yeah,
exposed.
I was like outed as a punk rocker.
Right.
Um,
It's so funny.
I mean, he was just looking for a place to get his son some lessons. Like it was totally friendly and sweet that he had just kind of been like, "Oh, hey, oh, you had a good show, thanks." And I helped him, get in contact with the person he needed. But then I had this whole group of very nice ladies who were a little surprised that that was what I did at the radio station. Um, but yeah, like you always end up with these layers of yourself that get revealed by accident.
Yeah.
I guess that was my shadow self.
Right.
So,
In a way, it was your shadow self in that realm. But I'm sure if you were out, somewhere in a different environment, it wouldn't necessarily be your shadow self in that environment. You know.
yeah, like I probably wouldn't dress like a pottery teacher at a punk show.
Right. And it's just
Um,
amazing to see the layers, like the way you just put it, of all the different people you meet. You don't know who, you could be at the DMV and the person who checks you out there could be a ninja on the weekend. You just never know.
I I think that might be a little obsolete in this day and age. I mean,
What, a
you don't,
ninja?
yeah, I don't think there's a lot of
There is a
job
ninja
openings for
school.
ninja.
There is what I'm saying is people have many different identities. You may meet somebody who's a cashier, but at home maybe they are a computer hacker. You just don't know who you're meeting when you just see one of their identities. And I think sometimes that even ties into love because sometimes you see somebody, oh, well, since they're wearing a Dallas Cowboys jersey, there's no way that they could know about the deep inner workings of film in the 1920s and 30s and 40s or whatever. So we are more than just what the identity is we're projecting at the time, and that's something to remember and think about, I think.
Well, since you were kind of interested in quotes earlier, one of my favorite quotes from any movie ever comes from 500 Days of Summer. And there's this lovelorn young man who's friends with his much younger sister, who turns out to be more mature and wise than he is. And she said to him, just because some cute girl likes the same weirdo crap you do does not make her your soulmate.
Yes, that's so
And
true.
there's wisdom there.
Yeah, I've never seen 500 Days of Summer. I just brought it up right now, 2009 romance comedy. I want to check it out.
You should.
I
I
really
think
do.
you in particular
Yeah,
would probably get something out of it.
yeah. So listen,
It's not a love story, just
we've
FYI.
got about 20 more minutes. I want you to really tell us as much as you can about your current passion, being a potter, and what that journey has been like.
Well, in 20 minutes.
Where do you start?
Well, I guess I could start with when I was a little kid, I used to like mixing things together. And I remember I would like even though I don't really wear a lot of makeup, I would make it when I was young. I would take like talcum powder and like food coloring, and I would I would mix water into talcum powder until it was a paste, and I would color it, and then I'd let it dry out, and then I'd use it as like like a child's idea of what like eyeshadow would be. So I was always kind of like inclined to this weird version of alchemy where I was like just trying to make things that involve like color and mixing little powders together. And um so I had this like alchemist streak. And when I got older, I had seen, my dad befriended this like kind of low key famous potter from Seagrove, the like one of the pottery meccas of the world in North Carolina. And I had already kind of been interested in pottery just as just a pastime because I'm kind of crafty. And we made friends with this guy. I talked to him a few times, and he did his best to tell me to not do pottery, that I would be unsuccessful and miserable. So, of course, I did not listen because you should never listen to people who give that kind of
would
advice.
tell you that? It's terrible. Go ahead.
Someone who had been in the scene a long time and, maybe had lost some of his, illusions about it and maybe was,
He was doing it for the wrong
but he
reason.
came from well, no, I mean, he was from a family situation where he was kind of born to it and maybe didn't,
Okay.
but he was quite good at it. Like, I mean, he was an amazing potter, but, he didn't come to it as someone who was, choosing it late in life as a career change.
Right, but still, you shouldn't
He
discourage
came to it as
people.
someone who had been immersed in it. He was just trying to help in his own way.
Okay. Fair enough.
Like no hard feelings toward him, but he told me to run and run screaming.
It's ineffable.
But when I was an undergrad at the college I went to, that I graduated from both times, I had a friend who was in the ceramics department, and I went to his show and I saw some of his work. I was very fascinated by the idea of some of the, chemical transformations that happen in a kiln. I remember he was into soda firing at the time, which gives you some interesting effects, kind of like texture like a navel orange on the outside of your piece. And I was just kind of fascinated that you could, cover your piece in, colorants and then put it in a kiln atmosphere with, baking soda and salt, and that would attach to the piece and become part of the glaze. I was just so into it. But I was a psych major and I was sticking to it. So I went off and I did grad school and all this stuff, and I was teaching, and I wasn't really making enough to live on as the independent woman I want to be. So I decided to just do a career change in midlife. And so I went back to school and I studied with the same teacher who had taught my friend, who I was so envious of. Envious of his major and the fact that he got to do ceramics. And that teacher turned out to be a very positive force in my life. And he taught me the basics of what I needed to know. He gave me the skills to teach myself the rest. I think that was his main strength. Like once I got to a certain point, when he saw that my real interest was in hand building and narikomi instead of throwing on the wheel all the time, he just let me do it. He just let me kind of go in that direction, and he didn't try to stifle me, and he didn't try to make me into a little clone of his own way of doing it. And then so I got really into the chemistry of it, and he let me become his studio tech and make the glazes for the college. We had a nice studio, and I didn't make all of them, but for that particular year I made as many of them as I could for everybody else. And so I learned what color turns what, how to, make a glaze that is food safe and have, a variation of the surface that you're looking for. I learned how to, do things that were transparent, how to add opacifiers, and, how to add bentonite if you have it, if it's settling too quickly in the bucket, things like that you just need to be taught.
It's a chemistry.
And then, yeah, it's chemistry it's chemistry you can experience, you can drink out of it. You make drinking vessels and eating plates and, bowls that you can, it's like art you can live your life with.
Has anybody ever considered alternate uses? Like, for instance, has anyone ever been buried in a coffin of pottery?
Well, I mean, we call those urns, and it's best if you're cremated first. Yes.
What I was imagining in my brain was a coffin, like a pot the size of a coffin, and somebody being encased in a pot. Like,
Well, if you had a big enough kiln, it could be done. Although big flat planes, like you might find in a coffin with old-fashioned shape, really flat slabs of clay do tend to warp a bit. So it might
hmm.
be a little warpy. Um, so I kind of fell in love with working with colored clay, and so I had to learn to color it myself because it's very expensive to buy it already made. And then I just kind of taught myself all of these things that were, not exactly what you learn in a basic pottery class. So I ended up doing independent studies with my mentor and going in some directions that, were kind of unique to me.
What kind of temperatures we're
And
talking about when you make these?
well, we kind of this is we have our own way of like measuring it. So super duper high fire is called cone 10. And the reason is there were literally these cones that are designed to melt at a certain temperature. And so rather than looking at like a thermometer and just trusting that that's the actual temp on the inside of the kiln, we would put these cones in, and you'd put uh you'd put them kind of at an angle, and when they started to melt they would bend over, and so you kind of you pull out a brick, and you got to wear eye protection. You look into this like inferno and see if the little cone has bent over the right amount, and if it has, then the kiln really did reach the temperature that vitrifies your clay.
I like that word,
And that's how you
vitrify.
know. And yeah, vitrify means what can and does melt in clay melts and then resolidifies, and it becomes far stronger than just the mud that it was made of.
So by
Because clay,
by
I
heating
mean,
it
I'll
up,
let you in on a little secret. Clay is mud.
well, of course, clay is mud. So
People,
by heating it up, it comes out stronger, right?
yes, yeah. So it melts and resolidifies, and it's something strong enough to survive, millennia. We find pottery of ancient cultures all the time.
I'm going to read the definition: vitrify, to convert into glass or a glassy substance by heat or and fusion.
And so that young alchemist that I was as a child grew up to kind of be able to make blue out of cobalt and, paint on pottery with red iron oxide washes and, use chrome to make green, things like that. Um, but, you know, it's it's hard to describe like the allure of it if you're not like kind of naturally, I don't know, just kind of attracted to strange chemicals and high temperatures
It's an artistry. I think
and
artists
yeah, I mean
would
it is.
understand it. I understand. I'd love to visit and see this all done. You know,
Well, you also feel like you're part of a lineage that stretches back to before written word. Like one
right?
of the first inventions humans came up with was, the clay pot, and that was how they lived their lives and
That's
how they prepared their food and
how
saved their
historians.
grains.
It's how historians date and identify certain cultures.
Yeah,
They look for their pottery.
well, I mean, like when we think about ancient Greece, a lot of what we learned was painted on their pottery.
Right.
And a lot of the written word, has, long since turned to dust. So it's like, I don't know, kind of deeply entrenched in just what it means to be human as opposed to some of the other intelligent beasts out there in the world.
Yeah. Any aspirations to not only work with clay pots, but do you have aspirations to work with glass, or have you worked with glass?
Well, I mean, there's silica in glaze. It's a glass-like substance.
Mm.
But as far as like just straight up glass work, I haven't tried that yet, no.
But is it something you might do?
Uh, I mean, I have a kiln. I could theoretically melt glass in it. But glasswork is another quite difficult art, and they're working with insane, super high temperatures. But anyway, as far as you were asking me about temperature, we kind of talk about it in cones rather than Fahrenheit. So mid-range is like cone 6, and low fire is like cone 2 or whatever. But
Cone.
not a lot of people work at really low temperatures.
That's a cool way.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of strikes up images of the cone heads. But
well, yeah, I could see a little graphic of this cone melting over, and then to identify the temperature. But it's fascinating.
We would make jokes with my mentor if the kiln got a little hotter than we had intended, like the Spinal Tap, like this one goes to 11. Because you're supposed to stop at cone 10 for most formulations of clay. And what it actually just means is the clay itself it's constructed. Like, you don't really, I mean, you can work with wild clay, and there are plenty of people who do. But in order to know exactly when it vitrifies, people tend to buy it pre-made and purified in some ways and kind of constructed from its separate parts, as opposed to just digging it out of the ground and hoping for the best.
Kat, who are the greatest potters of history?
Well,
Egyptians, Japanese?
It depends. I mean, you mean what culture?
Yes, who are the greatest potters in the world? I mean, who maybe then and now?
Oh, man. There are good potters in every culture, and they all have their own strengths,
Okay.
I think the Japanese have incredible functional pottery, especially regarding throwing off the hump and making, kind of tea sets that are really elegant and beautiful. But they're also amazing hand builders. I learned a lot from watching YouTube videos in Japanese, even though I don't speak Japanese. So I admire them greatly. But there are amazing potters just here in Seagrove. Like, I'm not in Seagrove, but in the area I grew up in, there are, some potters from like many generations who, they're born into it. They're throwing pots as children, and they're incredible potters.
Who made the strongest pots? The strongest pots? Like, is there pots out there that can take a bullet, or is it all just pretty fragile stuff?
I mean, it's brittle in a way. So porcelain's quite strong, but I wouldn't throw it against a wall. You'll break it.
Right. So pots in general are kind of fragile.
Stoneware is quite strong. I mean, I worked almost exclusively in stoneware when I was throwing, and I've dropped, like rather delicate stuff I've made, and it just bounced. I mean, it didn't bounce, but it hit the ground and did not break.
Okay, so there is degrees of strength.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the clay body and what's in it. Porcelain's delicate partially just because, I mean, mud isn't white. It doesn't come in white. It has to be kind of constructed out of kaolin and silica and other things. And because of that, you don't necessarily have the strength that you would in a darker clay that has, more actual clay in it than some of the more, white additives that can be relatively very expensive.
Right.
But, I mean, there's porcelain that has survived, incredible, like for centuries, like there are antiques that are worth, more money than either of us could really conceive of because they're so ancient.
Has anybody ever put in the ashes of their deceased relatives into the mix and created a literal pot out of someone?
Oh, I'm sure they have. They do that with glasswork as well.
Sounds pretty cool.
Putting the ashes in a glass ornament. I would prefer to just make an urn, like a regular urn.
Let me share something fascinating I heard in a movie recently with Tilda Swinton. She was she found this genie, and at some point in the movie they say that the glass that he was encased in, they were trying to, I don't know, I don't even know how this came about in the movie, but they shared the fact that when people blow glass back then, that the people were blowing so hard to make the glass that blood came out of their lungs because they were blowing so hard, and it actually became part of the art. And I wonder if that even was a factor with pottery. I wonder if people bled on it or cut themselves.
I bled on my pottery, but not deliberately. Like, I don't.
Did it become part of it? Part of the overall pot? Like this?
Well, I mean, it's a romantic notion, but
right.
let me just kind of say this: blood is organic, It contains organic matter, and because of that, the majority of it would burn away at kiln temperatures relatively soon, like even temperatures as low as just the bisque fire.
That's true. Okay.
So, and because of that, there's probably absolutely nothing in your blood that might survive a kiln atmosphere other than perhaps maybe the red iron oxide that makes your blood red does tend to survive a fire.
Interesting.
But I don't know if one could use blood as
You'd have to use your
a
teeth
decorative.
or your bones.
I wouldn't be inclined to do so.
This
Because
pot
I
is
need
made
those.
from the bones of my father's father. My grandfather's bones are now up something this bowl I'm eating out of my grandfather's bonage.
Well, I would suggest that there's something of myself that is ineffable that I leave in all the pottery that I make. Even if it isn't, the
Today's
bones from
podcast
the
has
back
been
of my mother's.
sponsored by the word ineffable.
Colgate. Don't forget to donate blood.
I'm making a shirt. It's going to say ineffable. Ineffable Eric, they call me.
That's actually kind of cute. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's
You can't sleep with me.
wouldn't-
I'm ineffable.
I wouldn't do that because, I mean, as romantic as the idea is that there would be a physical part of you surviving, I make functional pieces that I want people to actually drink from and use in their day-to-day lives. And who would want to have a drinking cup that had,
This was made from
bones in
my father's pelvis. And they'll be like, I don't want to drink from this pot anymore.
I mean, I make what we call Viking mugs in my class as a little bit of a joke, and that sounds like maybe something you might, put into a Viking mug. But I mean, you're in Norway now. You probably will be more in touch with Viking history than I currently am here in North Carolina.
I'm trying, but right now I'm just really kind of experiencing the pop culture of the city of Bergen, which has been fantastic. But I haven't really.
Well,
I
maybe
haven't seen any
check out their
pots.
pottery and send me some pictures.
I'll do that. I'll do. You know what? I did actually see a pot, but it was a big plant pot, and it was it looked like a half of a face, and it had a nose but no eyes, and it was like the bottom part of the human jaw up to the nose, and then it was the pot, and the rest of it was the plant growing out of it. That's the only pot I've taken a picture of since I've been here, but I'll send that to you.
Wait, did you? Some of that just went right over my head. What did you say this pot was made of?
So picture a human face. Okay, it's white stone, and then cut off the human face about halfway across where the nose is. Okay, so that was the pot, like the nose and the mouth downward into the chin, and where the chin arcs up into a point into the cheeks. It ends at the nose, and then the plant was planted inside that pot, and it grew out of it. I'll send you a picture. It's fascinating.
Do you mean this was pottery, or it was made of a people?
No, this was.
Was it a real?
It was a pot. It was
skull?
A real. No,
Oh, okay.
It was not real. It was.
It's like, what are you talking?
This is my face. No,
I don't know if a skull would survive a kiln. I don't think so.
No, it was just art. It was just art. It was a stone pot, shaped like a face. The bottom part of the face.
I did have a friend who made a pretty realistic skull ornament in my pottery class.
We've run out of time. I'm sorry.
Okay. I was going to say,
But
quite
listen,
the artist.
This is Kat from, did you say Hawksfire?
Hawksfire. It's pronounced like foxfire, but it's just hawks, like a flock of birds.
Hawksfire. Okay.
Hawksfire Ceramics.
Hawksfire Ceramics. Kat, it's been wonderful having you on the show. I would like to bring you
Thank you,
back.
dear.
I would like to bring you back. I love you. You've been my friend forever, and not a Thanksgiving goes by I don't think about you. And I will just say that I would love to have you back, and we can talk about other subjects. We don't have to. Now we have a little background of who you are, what you've been through. Now we can actually go in and discuss other different subjects. So I'll let you go. I love you so much. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Love you too, man.
And is there any last words you have for the folks out there? Now's the
Yeah,
time.
don't let the man keep you down. Speak truth to power.
All right. I love you.
Comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable.
And
See you later.
I'll talk to you soon. And
All right.
this podcast will be released in the next 48 hours. So take care, Kat.
All right.
I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.